to Unwritten Stories of Significance. Goddie returns. And I say that with passion. I say that with heartfelt love for this book and its message. Returning back is Robert Picart, the author of the book Goddie, a story of his mother's legacy, Goddie Picart, the history of her life in Jamaica with her family, and just him bringing it to fruition to educate our Canadian culture, literature, curriculum, and enjoying time with his mother. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Robert Picart. Robert, thank you for returning back to Unwritten Stories of Significance.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, my love. I went back and I did my little research. I don't want to take too much of this segment with me, but listening to the podcast and listening to her story, the beginning of the podcast, when she was talking about the plantation and the growing of the grapefruits and the bananas and stuff like that, and you talked to her about it. But what stood out to me was the land that her father owned. When you heard all that, how did you envision that? Like when you put yourself into the story, how was that like?
Wow, it's the land aspect of it was surreal. So a little bit of background. In
Yes.
2012, I took it upon myself to take my mom and take my family and one of her friends to Jamaica, because I knew as she was getting older, it was going to be harder to make those types of trips. So we actually went to Jamaica, part for vacation, of course, but with the sole purpose of bringing her back to her town. And so we had been there before many times with relatives dying and that type of thing. My goal this trip was to bring her back so she could just see it. And in this particular trip, it was the one trip where she actually showed me all of the land. So she showed me everything before we, be at relatives' houses and that type of thing. But this one trip, we stood exactly where the fields were, showed me where her house was, everything. So being able to digest all of that and then pour that out into the book, it's coming from actual memory and real moments with my mom in Jamaica.
Wow. Holy cow. But okay, that was touching. But when it touched me on the land, and she said, my father, that's patois. She said, had lots of land. And I'm thinking, lots of land. Like, how big was this? Like, the reason why I'm asking this question, I'm going to follow on this more. But how big was it? Like, we're talking plantain, grapefruit, bananas, coffee. I'm looking at my notes here. Red peas, bunga peas. Like, it's huge.
It was a vast land. It was the territory that my eyes couldn't see the end of it. And when I went there, there was coffee growing at the time, and it's been divided up now and changed over time, of course. But yeah, it was a very big piece of land, probably several acres. And it was touching to hear, because when you think about it in the context of production and work and obligation and contribution to the community, those types of pieces of land, not just for my family, but other families in the district, they contributed to the economy of that neighborhood. Spring Hill was its farms. There weren't any factories up there. And so being a part of that land, witnessing it for myself and understanding how vital that land was to their survival was very, very key. And when you think about it in its practical sense, everything changes in life but the land.
Yes.
The land remains. It gets cultivated for sure and maybe changes cosmetically, but fundamentally the land remains and holds the secrets, right? So
and it holds the secrets. And also too, when you go back now into history, the land of Britain coming in held value.
Yes.
So when I'm thinking of it now aloud, it held value and it came in. So when you look at it, and that's what kind of hit me when I was listening to her story, the land. So they're working it hard, producing all of this produce. It just blew me away, opened me up. And that's why this is important for education, for the curriculum, to understand the value of what it had. right?
Exactly. And if you really get into it, you get into it in terms of understanding the motivations of those who came to occupy. So
Yeah,
when you start really rewinding the clock back to 1494 and
yeah,
the Taino Indians, and walking around Jamaica and Puerto Rico and all these other Dominican Republic and all these different territories, speaking these different Arawak languages, they were the original inhabitants. And then you have folks coming from Europe. They're not stopping there because they want to drink. They're stopping there because of the land and the access to capital unearned, and the vantage points from a supply chain perspective. All of that is underscored by the land.
wow. How does that make you feel? And that's why I said what I said. So you went exactly to where I wanted you to go.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember my mom in Jamaica when certain parts of her family had passed on, and we were living in England at the time, and she had to go back to reclaim it. The work she had to go back to prove that it was her land. And listening to Goddie's story lets me know the land and the wealth that Jamaicans, they were wealthy. They were wealthy at the time. So, and still are, and still fight till this day to claim what is theirs.
Mm-hmm. It's the one undeniable piece of identity, right? And so when you have that asset, if you will, that gets passed down from family to family, the minute that the last person drops the baton and loses the deed, or however the land debates start, it throws into question who we are. If you don't have somewhere to go back to and something to claim, you become sort of this ship that's been disconnected from the port. In a theoretical way, you always belong somewhere. We're in Canada, we're in different places that we are, but knowing that you have a place to go back to, knowing that in theory our land is there, our heritage is there, our blood is sown there, and it's important. It's important to tie into identity. It's important in terms of assets and capital and wealth generation. And everyone knew that, from the Spaniards to the Europeans to everyone after that. So the land is important.
When you listen to your mom talking about her life in Jamaica and listening to what she went through and listening, and you did say in the first segment, you felt, you said, I forget the words now, but you said, I'm going to use the word honored to tell her story. But you're listening to her tell her story. And I'm going to ask you again, because this is important. And I take my mom passed, as I shared with you, on her history. But you listen to your mother on what she did, the stepping stone she took for yourself and your brother and your generations to keep moving forward. How did you feel, Robert?
You just feel, for me, I try not to make it too complicated. For me, it's just, there's a sense of responsibility that I have and duty that I have that is not negotiable. Right. And so when you think about, okay, do I have to go to school, or do I have to go to college or get a skill? It's not negotiable. The price has already been paid in blood and tears and travel and finance and treasure to pave a way for me. And so I am obligated to hold the flag up. It's kind of like, you ever see those old Civil War battle scenes where the person holds the flag and they're running first, and then they fall, and then somebody else has to pick up the flag and they keep running. Well, the flag gets passed on. So you have to keep running towards the mark until it's no longer your role to do, and those behind you come and pick up the flag. But nevertheless, the flag must be picked up. So that's how I felt about it.
Wow. What kept you motivated, hon? What kept you motivated? What kept you driven?
In terms of the process of writing the book?
Yes.
Part of it was really the sensitivity of the subject. My mom is not a young person, and I wanted her to be able to read it. And so this wasn't something that I could just make a 5-year project or a 10-year project. I didn't have that luxury. I had the luxury of get it done now. And so, and rightfully so, because as we know, as they get older, the memories start to chip away a little bit. And I knew that I was getting her really at that point where maybe she wasn't going to be memory-wise as fresh as she would be in the next few years. So it was really a moment to just expedite the process. There were many nights when I was writing all night. I started maybe Saturday evening, 6 o'clock, and I was 4 a.m. still like writing, because I needed to get to a certain point before I could, hand it off. So it was just a matter of duty. It was a matter of this must be done. And my level of stamina, my level of physical ability was really just, it was just not a negotiable thing. It needed to be completed. It was that important.
Beautiful, hon. When you asked your mother to be part of this legacy of history, when you asked her, how did you approach her? I don't think I've ever asked you that question. How did you approach her to share history?
It was passive. So remember, this started off as a recording. So it was her just talking, which really, she's just talking, and it's not really a lot of effort. And
Yes.
then after a while, I started, when she started saying, well, what are you going to do with all this? I said, I'm thinking about writing a book. And I said, is that okay? And she said, well, okay, it's fine. Our parents, they just let us do whatever after a certain point. And
Yeah.
so, but I think she realized that, oh, he's really writing a book, because I kept asking her more questions. And as I kept asking her more questions, she started to participate in the process and give me what I call fifth level information. So you get that first level, second level, but then you get down to the granular details of what was happening in that situation and what was going on. And that's what the book is made of. It's made of that fifth level knowledge level of what parents share, if that makes sense. So
no, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of what was I gonna say to you now? Because I'm so intrigued with it, with what you're saying. Is that, but her memory, this is what blew me away, is the memory that she shared with you of her life, like going through the whole entire thing and the working hard on the land. Like, that's what blew me away. Like her memory, like, how old is she? Like, she was in her 90s. Like, it just blew me away how she never forgot.
Yeah,
anything.
she would be 92 when she was working on the book with me. And I'll tell you this, it's still really quite fascinating. Her memory of things that happened 70 years ago is more crisp than last week's lunch. And she remembered everything. So I mentioned a moment ago about having that fifth level of detail. She was giving me detail about what the boat was like when she was traveling, and how many days, what countries the boat stopped in on their way to England. She remembered the temperature when she got off the boat. Like, she remembered everything. And then what I did was, I took her word, but then I went and did a little research on my own. Like, I'd look up the port and look at where it's positioned in the town and where the train station was and all of those things. So when she said, oh, I had to run to the train station, it was so far away, I literally looked up the map, and I'm like, wow, she didn't miss a beat. She remembered every street. And so, yeah, I credit her for that. I really do.
That's what blows my mind. And she tell the podcast, but the book is another whole different story.
Yes,
and on that,
yes.
Yes, my love. We'll be right back with Robert Picart on Goddie. Stay tuned. Right. Welcome back to Unwritten, Stories of Significance, Part 2, with Robert Picart and his amazing story on his mother, Goddie. Robert, when we talked about the land, we're going to talk about it just for a minute here. They weren't just no flat terrains that your mother had to take care of with the lands and the plantation and the grapefruit and the bananas. Like, can you just emphasize on that so when the listeners understand what she was working on every day?
Well, I mean, if you look at it geographically, Blue Mountain, Cascade, Spring Hill, that whole area, it's literally on a mountain. When you go up there, you're on a small road and it's winding around a mountain. And so when we think about, well, where are they farming if there's no flatlands, if you will? And when I went there, my mom brought me there, it literally, folks are farming on hills and small plateaus, if you will. And it's, I saw for myself, it's not an easy thing. You have, vegetation and growth and just plants all along the hill and different areas. Anywhere where they can really get it going, they're going to plant something. And don't get me wrong, these are plants that are vibrant, vegetables that are bigger than your arm, and it's wonderful to see. And they definitely are producing. But the real point is the fact that they are making much out of little. And it's not this wonderful bastion of flat lands with tractors running up and down neat rows. It's hardworking people trying to make it work, picking big boulders out of land masses and rock hillsides and cultivating it manually in some cases to make it all work. And that's really just a testament to who Jamaicans are. We are going to take a little of what we have and make it a lot and make it work.
That is so true, because 1972, my mom took myself and my brother, because we were born in London, England. Mm. And long story short, if I can just celebrate your story here, when she took us to Clarendon, Jamaica, there was a place called Mandeville. Mm-hmm. And Mandeville, I could not believe it. I don't know what age I was then, but I was whatever. But there was a drop off that this gentleman went down with his cutlass. And he was going down, and my brother and I looked and said, what? I don't know what I said at the time, and they worked so hard, and they were focused, but they worked. So when I look back and listen to your mother's podcast and the story, everything just came to light.
Yeah.
How? Yeah. How it was.
It's hard work. It's hard work. And you may have had the benefit of oxen, tractor, and plows to kind of make some of it work, but a lot of it was just pure swinging the machete, pure harvesting manually. I write about that in the chapter with Lincoln, where he comes back from the war and he's having to deal with the fields, and Goddie meets him out there. And that is a reflection of really the stories of what my mom shared with me, is that it was hard work. And the reality is that you didn't have the luxury of just doing it whenever you wanted. Everything that came out of the ground had to find its way to the market, because that's how you produced income. And so, there was a whole cycle of, you have to work hard to earn and to keep and to maintain, and you had to negotiate with the land. The land was the boss. It will tell you whether you're going to yield or whether you're not going to yield. And you just had to keep at it no matter what. It becomes the nature innate in the people themselves. Why are Jamaicans so hardworking? Why are we so withstanding, so long-suffering? The land is hardworking. The land is long-suffering. And so we're just a testament of where we come from.
That's why this book, Goddie, is a must-have in libraries and home, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we get into things. Yes, there's a story of Goddie and a young girl trying to make her way from one situation to the next. But the undercurrent of the story is really talking about Jamaica itself. Jamaica is kind of the second character in this book. Not just from the land perspective, which we've been talking about, but also from the food perspective, and also from the infrastructure perspective. We talk about how mail is delivered up in the country, and how folks get back and forth to school, and all those types of things. All of those things speak to just life itself, and what makes Jamaica and the people from it who they are. And all of it together really becomes its own character in the book.
Wow, that's incredible. That is so incredible, hon. I'm going to ask you something here off the grid. I went to school, and my parents are Jamaican, both. Dad's Kingstonian, mom's from Clarendon. And I never heard of the history. I heard of a little bit of Black history, just a little bit. More American history than Canadian history, honestly. Honest to God. But I never heard of Afro-Caribbean or Jamaican, any history like that. Now you're bringing it out in a book. Does that not concern you when you see it today? Because you want it part of the curriculum. You want representation of it. Does that concern you as an author when you see that it was not presented, and why this book is so important?
Does it concern me? I would say it doesn't surprise me. It's no secret. Folks in the educational realm where it doesn't suit them spend a lot of time on Black history, especially Caribbean Black history. Right. So no, that doesn't surprise me. Sure, we know about a lot of American Black history, but do we know how the Tiano Indians transferred to the Nigerian visitors or slaves into Jamaica? Do we understand that? Do we understand the access to capital that happened as a result of the Spaniards taking over the land, and then the English coming in, and the Germans and everyone else? Do we understand that? No, that's not written in vast volumes anywhere. It's something that you have to research and try and figure it out yourself. And so, no, it doesn't surprise me, but I knew that it was important to be able to paint that side of the story, because you have to understand that to understand the motivations of the people in the story. You have to understand. I talk about the trees in the story being the overseers, the new overseers that took the place of the original overseers. So you have to understand that that really just depicts, the working of the land and working hard and knowing that, you're being watched, but it wasn't by the historical overseers, if you will. It was by, the land itself. I would say that the history of Jamaica, I would say the culture of Jamaica is the second character in this story, in food, in dialect, in land, in economy, in everything you can think of, for sure.
Your research must have been massive.
Yeah.
This wasn't a blanket. This was.
No, I wanted to do that because, number one, I wanted to make sure that I didn't just rely on my mom's memory alone. I needed to make sure I had a granular understanding of Jamaica. So I was born in Canada, and of course I was raised in a Jamaican home, but my upbringing was in Canada. It wasn't in Jamaica. So I was very sensitive to the fact that I can't just spew off the top of my head anything that I think I heard in a patty shop in Toronto. I had to make sure that I understood the history. I had to make as best as I could and make sure I understood the granular aspects of life in Jamaica. So I drew on a few things. Number one, I drew on my mom's memory, of course. And then I started drawing on my relatives' memory. So I called up my cousins in Jamaica, still living in Jamaica today, and talked to them. Tell me how the house looked. What did it look like? Did it have this? Did it have that? Was there an outdoor kitchen, like mommy says? So I had to validate a lot of the information that my mom said, not to say that she was lying, but just to make sure I understood the gravity of what it was all about. And then I started going into understanding Jamaica, doing the rich history online, going to the Jamaica National Archives, and really just understanding the people. Where did they come from? The economics, the ports, all of those things, even though they may have only been a small fragment of the story. I wanted to understand how long it took to go from Mr. Hamill's house down to the port. What were the streets? So I went on Google, I traced it. I traced how long it would take the things would happen. So everything in that book is a function and a product of the research, granular and otherwise, of me really understanding Jamaica.
When Jamaicans, okay, let's say Jamaicans now, own this book, and from Jamaicans to whomever wants to move forward in life needs to own this book. And I'm branding it right now.
That's fine.
Is when they read it and understand, and some that didn't understand the history, as which you found out from speaking with your mother, but going back. Have you had any conversations with Jamaicans from reading this book? Have you?
Oh, yeah. That's the fun part for me, honestly. Because secretly, I'm like, okay, I know I'm not born in Jamaica. I'm of Jamaicans, but so for me, that's a little bit of a litmus test. How did you like the book? Was there anything that was off? And every time I talk to someone, Jamaican who's born there, I said, is there anything that wasn't quite right in your mind? And everyone, always responded, this brought me right back. Everything is as I remember it, and it's really a touching moment for some people to say, this is how it was at my grandmother's house. This is how it was with my auntie's house. Yeah, my dad had to do the same thing. And so it's been a real affirmation to hear from various people who don't know each other, really affirm not the story, but the details of the story. Like I said, Jamaica itself is the second character in this book. So when I start talking about Kingston, I start talking about Port Antonio and start talking about how long it took to walk there. They're like, yeah, man, this is how long it took to walk there. That's what it was. When I start talking about carrying things in a crocus bag and all of that, yes, they did that. So I'm very excited and humbled by the fact that I was able to paint a picture that resonated with folks who lived it. And they were able to affirm me that yes, he got it right. He didn't just pull it off the top of his head. So I'm very, very happy about that. And it makes me feel good.
What's your next chapter, my love, with this book, Goddie? Where would you like it? I know from listening to your brother, but I'm talking to the author here now. Where would you like it to go? What message would you like it to leave? From Robert, the author.
Yeah, I would like this book to continue to be a celebration of the West Indian contribution to Canada. I want people to read this book and feel good. I want folks to read this book and feel informed and affirmed that their understanding of Jamaica is just more than, you know, the superficial, if you will. I want folks to read this book and to take away from it that they can survive anything, they can overcome anything, that they can really persevere if they put their mind to it. I want people to read this book, especially those who may not come from the West Indies or Jamaica specifically, and really understand the granular fiber that makes up this great people, what they're willing to give up in order to be able to just catch a glimpse or a hope of what they could have in another place. And maybe for those who are maybe Native Canadians, maybe feel a little bit differently in understanding what people have to really go through in order to be able to get this access to this thing called Canadian life. And then for those who are Black people, but West Indian folks, again, it's just it's a celebration, and it's an affirmation. It's a head nod to say we learned, especially for people who weren't from Jamaica but grew up in Jamaican homes or West Indian homes. This is to nod to our elders to say we listened, we heard the stories, we listened to everything you said. Here's a reflection of what I heard from all of my growing up. So it's a lot.
My hat's off to you, my love. For honestly, look at that beautiful smile. My hat's off to you in writing this book. And a thank you to your mother, Goddie, for sitting down patiently and writing this book. I thank you so much for returning. Thank you, Robert.